All right. Chapter 24. That through lenses rimmed with horizon, inhabitants of this earth have seen revelations of other worlds, that atmospheric strata of different densities are lenses, but that the faults of the wide glasses in the observatories are so intensified in atmospheric revelations that all our data are distortions. Our acceptance is that every mirage has a primary, that in human mind, all poetry is based upon observation, and that imagery in the sky is similarly uncreative. If a mirage cannot be traced to the known upon this earth, one supposes that it is either a derivation from the unknown upon this earth or from the unknown somewhere else. We shall have the data of a series of mirages in Sweden or upon the shores of the Baltic from October 1881 to December 1888. I take most of the data from Nature, Knowledge, Cosmos, and L'Astronomie, published in this period. I have no data of such appearances in this region either before or after this period. The suggestion in my own mind is that they were not mirages from terrestrial primaries, or they would not be so confined to one period, but were shadows or mirages from something that was in temporary suspension over the Baltic and Sweden. All details distorted and reported in terms of familiar terrestrial appearances. October 10th, 1881, that at Ruggenwald, Pomerania, the mirage of a village had been seen, snow-covered roofs from which hung icicles, human forms distinctly visible. It was believed that the mirage was a representation of the town of Nexo on the island of Bornholm. Ruggenwald is on the Baltic, and Nexo is about 100 miles northwest in the Baltic. The first definite account of the mirages of Sweden, findable by me, is published in Nature, June 29, 1882, where it is said that preceding instances have had attracted attention. That in May 1882, over Lake Orsa, Sweden, representations of steamships had been seen, and then islands covered with vegetation. Night of May 19, 1883, beams of light at Lake Ludvika, Sweden. They looked like a representation of a lake in moonshine, with shores covered with trees showing faint outlines of farms. May 28, 1883, at Finnsbo, Sweden, changing scenes at short intervals, mountain, lakes, and farms. October 16, 1884, Lindsberg, a large town with four-storied houses, a castle, and a lake. May 22nd, 1885, Gothland, a town surrounded by high mountains, a large vessel in front of the town. June 15th, 1885, near Oxland, two wooded islands, a construction upon one of them, and two warships. It is said that at the time 2 Swedish warships were at sea, but were at considerable distance north of Oxelösund. September 12, 1885, Vala, a representation that is said to have been a remarkable mirage, but that is described as if the appearances were cloud forms, several monitors, one changing into a spouting whale and the other into a crocodile. Then forests, dancers, a wooded island with buildings and a park. September 29th, 1885, again at Vala, between 8 and 9 o'clock p.m., a lurid glare upon the northwestern horizon, a cloud bank, animals, groups of dancers, a forest, and then a park with paths. July 15th, 1888, Hudilakwall, July 15th, 1888, Hudik Wall, a tempestuous sea, and a vessel upon it, a small boat leaving the vessel. Upon October 8th, 1888, at Mirage on the Baltic, but in Russia, was seen a mirage of a city that lasted an hour. It is said that some buildings were recognized and that the representation was identified with St. Petersburg, which is about 200 miles from the Baltic. That a large substantial mass, presumably of land, can be in at least temporary suspension over a point upon this earth's surface and not fall, and be, in ordinary circumstances, invisible. In L'Astronomie 1887-426 mm, Code and Penyon, Both of them astronomers, well known for their conventional observations and writings, publish accounts of an unknown body that appeared upon the sun's limb for 20 or 30 seconds after the eclipse of August 19th, 1887. They saw a round body, apparent diameter about 1/10 of the apparent diameter of the sun, according to the sketch that is published. Well, astronomy, these two observers write separately, and in the city of Marcellus, their observations were made at a distance apart. But the unknown body was seen by both upon the same part of the sun's limb, so it is supposed that it could not have been a balloon, nor a circular cloud, nor anything else very near to this earth. But many astronomers in other parts of Europe were watching this eclipse, and it seems acceptable that others besides two in Marcellus continued to look immediately after the eclipse, but from nowhere else came a report upon this object, so that all indications are that it was far from the sun and near Marcellus, but farther than clouds or balloons in this local sky. I can draw no diagram that can satisfy all these circumstances, except by supposing the sun to be only a few thousand miles away. If little black stones fall 4 times in 11 years to one part of this earth's surface and fall nowhere else, we are in conceiving of a fixed origin somewhere above a stationary earth, at least conceiving in terms of data, and whether we are fanatics or not, we are not of the type of other upholders of stationariness of this earth who care more for Moses than they do for data. I'd not like to have it thought that we are not great admirers of Moses sometimes, the rock that hung in the sky of Servia. Upon October 13th, 1872, a stone fell from the sky to this earth near the town of Socobanya, Servia. If it were not a peculiar stone, there is no force to this datum. It is said that it was unknown stone. It is said that it was unknown stone. A name was invented for it. The stone was called Bajite, after the town near which it fell. 17 years later, December 1st, 1889, another rock of Bajite fell in Servia near Jellica. For Mooner's account of these stories, see La Astronomie 1890-272 and Comptes Rendus 92-331. Also, see La Nature 1881-1-192. According to Menur, these stones did fall from the sky. Indigenous to this earth, there are no such stones. Nowhere else have such stones fallen from the sky. They are identical in material. They fell 17 years apart. At times, when we think favorably of this work of ours, we see in it a pointing out of an evil of modern specialization. A seismologist studies earthquakes and an astronomer studies meteors. Neither studies both earthquakes and meteors, and consequently, each, ignorant of the data collected by the other, sees no relation between the two phenomena. The treatment of the event in Servia, December 1st, 1889, is an instance of conventional scientific attempts to understand something by separately or specially focusing upon different aspects and not combining into an inclusive concept. Manure writes only upon the stones that fell from the sky and does not mention an earthquake at the time. Milne, in his catalog of destructive earthquakes, lists the occurrence of an earthquake and does not mention stones that fell from the sky. All combinations greatly affect the character of components. In our combination of the two aspects, we see that the phenomenon was not an earthquake, as earthquakes are commonly understood, though it may have been meteoric, but was not meteoric in ordinary terms of meteors because of the unlikelihood that meteors identical in material should 17 years apart fall upon the same part of this Earth's surface and nowhere else. This occurrence was, of course, an explosion in the sky, and its vibrations were communicated to the Earth below, with all the effects of any other kind of earthquakes. Back in our earliest confusion of the data of a century's first quarter, we had awareness of this combination and its conventional misinterpretation. That many concussions that have been communicated from explosions in the sky have been cataloged in lists of subterranean earthquakes. We are farther along now in our data of the 19th century, and now we come across awareness in other minds of this distinguishment. At 8:20 a.m., November 20th, 1887, was heard and felt something that was reported from many places in the region that is known to us as the London Triangle as an earthquake, though in some towns it was thought that a great explosion, perhaps in London, had occurred. It was reported from Reading and from 4 towns near Reading, and Reading is said to be one of the places where the concussion was greatest. There were several accounts of slight alarm among sheep, which are sensitive to meteors and earthquakes. You didn't know that, did you? But in Simon's Met Mag, Mr. H.G. Fordham wrote that the occurrence was not an earthquake, that a meteor had exploded. He had very little to base his opinion on. Out of scores of descriptions, he had record of only 2 assertions that something had been in the sky. Nevertheless, because the sound was so much greater than the concussion, Mr. Fordham came to his conclusion. In Simmons Met Mag 23-154, Dr. R.H. Wake writes that upon the evening of November 3rd, 1888, in a region about 4 miles wide and 10 or 15 miles long in the Thames Valley near Reading, flocks of sheep had rushed from their folds in a common alarm. About a year later, in the Chittenden Hills, which extended in a northeasterly direction from the Thames Valley near Reading, there was another such occurrence. In the London Standard, November 7th, 1889, the Reverend J. Ross Barker of Chesham, a town about 25 miles northeast of Reading, writes that upon October 25th, 1889, many flocks of sheep in a region of 30 square miles had, by common impulse, broken from their folds. Mr. Barker asks whether anyone knew of a meteor or of an earthquake at the time. In Volume 24, Simmons Met Mag, Mr. Simmons accepts that all 3 of these occurrences were effects of meteoric explosions in the sky. The phenomena are insignificant relatively to some that we have considered. The significance is in this definite recognition in orthodoxy itself that some supposed earthquakes or effects of supposed earthquakes are reactions to explosions in the sky.